¿Cómo puedes echarme de mi propia casa? The words slipped out of my mouth before I even realized I had said them. My voice sounded strange, small, like it didn't belong to me. My father didn't even look at me. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room with his hands on his hips, smiling proudly at my sister as if he had just given her the greatest gift in the world. "You'll love it here," he said to her. "Plenty of space. This house is perfect for you." Perfect for you. Not for us. Not for me. Just for her. I stood there near the staircase, frozen, watching strangers carry boxes through the front door of the house I had lived in for years. The same door I had unlocked every day after work. The same door whose keys were still sitting in my pocket. Boxes kept coming. Suitcases. Furniture. My sister walked behind the movers, pointing at different corners of the living room like a queen assigning rooms in a palace. "No, put that couch near the window," she told them casually. Then she glanced at me. Not confused, not apologetic, just annoyed, like I was standing in the way of something that already belonged to her. "Why are you just standing there?" she said. My throat tightened, because I didn't know what to say, because no one had told me this was happening, because somehow my own home had turned into a place where I suddenly felt like a guest. My father clapped his hands once, loudly, as if ending a meeting. "All right," he said, "let's get this organized." Then he turned to me, finally. For a second, I thought he might explain something. Maybe he would say this was temporary. Maybe he would ask me to help. Maybe he would at least acknowledge that I lived here too. Instead, he said something that made the room feel colder. "You'll need to clear out the guest room." The guest room. That was my room. I blinked. "Why?" He sighed, already impatient. "Because your sister needs the space," he replied. My sister crossed her arms and leaned against the wall like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. "She's doing me a favor," my father continued. "She's going through a tough time. Family helps family. Family helps family." The sentence echoed in my head like a joke no one else understood, because no one had asked me. No one had warned me. No one had even mentioned that my sister would be moving into the house. And now suddenly, everything had already been decided. ¿Qué está pasando realmente aquí? I swallowed. The movers brushed past me carrying another box toward the hallway. My hallway. One of them accidentally bumped my shoulder. He didn't apologize. To him, I was just another person standing in the way. My sister walked into the kitchen next, opening cabinets like she was inspecting a hotel suite. "Oh, wow," she said. "You've barely changed anything in here?" She said it with that tone. That tone that always meant she thought she could do better. My father followed her, nodding approvingly. "You'll fix it up," he told her. "Make it feel like home." Make it feel like home. Something twisted in my chest, because it already was, or at least, it had been, until today, until this moment. I walked slowly into the kitchen doorway, listening to them talk about paint colors and furniture like they were planning a renovation show. My sister opened the refrigerator. "Oh my God," she laughed. "You still buy the cheap brand of milk?" My father chuckled. "You know how they are," he said dismissively. "They, not you, not my child. Just they." Like I wasn't even part of the conversation anymore, like I had already been pushed out of the story. "Papa," I started. He raised a hand without looking at me. "Not now." 3 simple words, but they hit harder than anything else that day, because they weren't angry, they were dismissive, like my voice didn't matter, like whatever I wanted to say wasn't important enough to interrupt their plans. I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen table where I had sat alone countless nights, the same cabinets I had filled, the same sink where I had fixed the leaking pipe myself 2 winters ago. Every detail in this house carried a memory, yet somehow, I was the only one who seemed to notice. My sister leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said casually, "I might take the bigger bedroom upstairs." My father nodded immediately. Of course. My heart skipped. The bigger bedroom, the master bedroom. I stared at them. You can't just, ¿de verdad creen que pueden decidir todo sin mí? The words almost slipped out, but I stopped myself, because suddenly I understood something strange. Neither of them looked nervous. Neither of them looked guilty. They were acting like this decision was completely normal, like the house was theirs to give, like I had no say in any of it. And that realization, that quiet, uncomfortable realization, was the first moment I understood something important. They had made a huge mistake, but they didn't know it yet. ¿Alguna vez te has sentido como un extraño en tu propia casa? That question kept repeating in my head the first night my sister slept under that roof. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar footsteps moving through the hallway. Footsteps that sounded confident, comfortable, like the person walking there believed they belonged. Every step echoed through the house like a quiet reminder that something had changed, and no one cared how it made me feel. The next morning, the transformation had already begun. I walked into the kitchen expecting silence, the same routine I had followed for years. Instead, I stopped in the doorway. My sister stood at the counter, rearranging things. The coffee maker had been moved, the toaster was gone. 3 of the cabinets were wide open, dishes stacked on the counter like someone had decided to rebuild the entire kitchen overnight. She glanced at me briefly. "Oh, good," she said casually. "You're up." No greeting, no apology, just that same tone, like I was the one arriving in someone else's house. "What happened to the toaster?" I asked. She shrugged without looking up. "I threw it out." I blinked. "You... what?" "It was ugly," she replied simply. "And old. Old." I stared at the empty space where it had always sat. It worked perfectly. I had bought it myself, but to her it was just another thing she could erase. My father walked in moments later, already dressed for the day. He looked around the kitchen and smiled. "Wow," he said approvingly. "Looks better already." Better. My chest tightened, because I realized something in that moment. Every change she made, every decision she took, he supported it without question. ¿Por qué nadie me preguntó nada? The question burned inside my throat, but I kept it there. Instead, I poured coffee and sat at the table quietly. They talked about furniture, about repainting the living room, about opening up the space. As if the house had been waiting all these years for someone else to fix it. Later that afternoon, I came home from work and noticed something strange the moment I stepped inside. The smell. Fresh paint. I walked into the living room slowly. The pale gray walls I had chosen years ago were gone. Half the room was now covered in a bright cream color that looked like something from a hotel lobby. My sister stood on a ladder, painting the wall with slow, confident strokes. "You started painting?" I asked. She looked down at me like I had asked something ridiculous. Obviously. My father sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, completely relaxed. "Looks nice, right?" he said. I looked around the room. Paint trays, drop cloths, my bookshelf pushed into the corner. A few of my things were missing entirely. "Where are my books?" "Oh," my sister said casually. "I boxed them up." "Boxed them up. Why?" She shrugged. "They didn't match the room." Didn't match the room. Something inside me twisted again, because this wasn't just redecorating. This was erasing, piece by piece, memory by memory. Hasta donde van a llegar? Days passed like that, small changes, quiet takeovers. The couch was replaced. The dining chairs disappeared. One evening, I opened the closet in the hallway and realized half my coats were gone. I searched the house until I finally found them stuffed inside a cardboard box in the garage, like forgotten storage, like someone else's leftovers. When I asked my sister about it, she barely looked up from her phone. "You had too much stuff," she said. Too much stuff. My father didn't even react. He had started spending most evenings watching television with her, laughing at shows while I sat at the edge of the room, feeling like a visitor waiting for permission to speak. Sometimes I caught him looking at her with pride, like he had done something noble, like giving her this house made him a hero. One night at dinner, she brought up something that made the air in the room suddenly heavier. "I was thinking," she said, stirring her food slowly. "We should probably turn the guest room into my office." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The guest room. My room. My father nodded thoughtfully. That's not a bad idea. My stomach dropped, because they weren't even pretending anymore. They spoke about the house like my presence was temporary, like eventually I would simply disappear. De verdad creen que me voy a ir? I wanted to say it. I wanted to shout it across the table. But instead, I sat there in silence, watching them plan a future inside walls they believed belonged to them. And the strangest part? They never once questioned it. Not once. Because in their minds, I was just someone living in the house, not someone who actually owned it. ¿Qué pasaría si un día descubrieran que todo lo que creen es una mentira? That thought followed me everywhere, through the hallway, through the kitchen, through the living room that no longer looked like mine. Days turned into weeks, and the house kept changing in quiet, relentless ways. New curtains appeared. A different couch replaced the old one. The walls were repainted again, this time a soft beige that my sister proudly called modern. Every time I walked through the front door after work, something else was different. Something else had been moved. Something else had disappeared. And each time, the same strange feeling settled deeper in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something colder. The knowledge that none of this should have been happening, and yet no one seemed to notice. One evening I stepped into the kitchen and saw my sister sitting at the table with a notebook sketching something. Floor plans. She looked up with excitement in her eyes. "Oh, good. You're here," she said. I didn't like the way that sounded. "Why?" She turned the notebook toward me. "I'm thinking about knocking down this wall," she explained, pointing to the space between the kitchen and dining area. "Open concept." My stomach tightened. "You're talking about construction." She nodded casually. "Yeah. Dad says it would make the house feel bigger, Dad says." I glanced toward the living room where my father sat watching television like nothing unusual was happening. "Did you call a contractor?" I asked carefully. "Not yet," she said, "but I did make a few calls." A few calls. My heart beat a little faster, because that meant paperwork, permits, approvals, things that involved more than just moving furniture around, and suddenly, the situation felt different. ¿Y si alguien más empieza a hacer preguntas? The thought lingered. 2 days later, those questions finally arrived. I came home earlier than usual that afternoon. The sky outside was gray, and the air carried the smell of rain. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed a car parked near the curb, a car I didn't recognize. When I opened the front door, voices echoed through the house. My sister's voice, my father's voice, and someone else, someone older, professional. I stepped into the living room and froze. A man in a dark jacket stood near the kitchen entrance, holding a clipboard. He looked like someone who spent his life reviewing documents, inspecting details. "Ah," my sister said when she saw me. "You're home." Her tone sounded slightly irritated, like my presence had interrupted something important. "This is Mr. Alvarez," she continued. "He's looking at the house." Looking at the house. The man nodded politely. "Just reviewing some information," he said. Information. My pulse slowed, because suddenly, everything felt very quiet inside my head. Too quiet. "What kind of information?" I asked calmly. My sister waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, relax. It's just about permits for the renovation." Permits. The word hung in the air like a spark waiting to ignite. Mr. Alvarez glanced down at his clipboard again. "Yes," he said thoughtfully. "I was just confirming property details before moving forward." Property details. My father stood up then, smiling confidently. "This is my house," he said proudly. "Whatever paperwork you need, we'll handle it." I watched the man's expression carefully. He didn't argue, but he didn't nod either. Instead, he flipped through a few pages. "Just a routine verification," he explained. His finger traced something on the paper. Then he looked up again. "At the moment, I'm simply confirming the registered owner." Registered owner. For a moment, no one spoke. My sister leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed. "Dad's owned the place forever," she said. "Forever." Mr. Alvarez tilted his head slightly. Something about his silence felt heavy, like a door slowly opening. ¿Qué pasa cuando la verdad aparece en el momento equivocado? I leaned against the wall, folding my arms quietly. My father chuckled. Been in the family a long time, he said confidently. You won't find any problems there. The man nodded slowly. Then he tapped the paper again. Interesting, he murmured. My sister frowned. What? He looked between the three of us. Well, that's why we verify these things. My father's smile faded slightly. Verify what? Mr. Alvarez turned the clipboard so he could read more clearly. The registered owner of this property, he said calmly. A pause followed, a long one. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind us. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. My sister crossed her arms impatiently. So? Mr. Alvarez adjusted his glasses. Then he said something that shifted the entire room. The documentation here lists a different name. Silence fell instantly. My father frowned. That's impossible. My sister laughed nervously. Yeah, you must be looking at the wrong file. The man didn't argue. He simply glanced up again. His eyes moved slowly toward me. Not accusing, not surprised. Just observant. As if he already understood something the others didn't. And in that moment, I realized the truth had finally reached the surface. Not because I revealed it, but because someone else had started asking the right questions. And the answers were about to change everything. ¿Qué ocurre cuando una mentira dura demasiado tiempo y finalmente se rompe? The silence in the room felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Mr. Alvarez was still holding the clipboard. My father stood frozen near the couch, confusion slowly replacing the confidence he had been carrying for weeks. And my sister. She looked irritated, not worried, just impatient. Well? She said sharply. Who's the name? Mr. Alvarez didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down at the document again, then back at my father. Sir, he said calmly, when property records are filed with the county, ownership becomes a matter of public record. My father crossed his arms. I know how property works, he replied. I bought this house. Bought. The word echoed through the room. Mr. Alvarez nodded slightly. That may have been the case at one time, he said carefully. But according to this record, ownership was transferred several years ago. My sister leaned forward. Transferred to who? The rain outside had started falling harder, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Mr. Alvarez finally lifted the clipboard slightly. His eyes moved across the room, and then they stopped on me. According to this, he said quietly, the registered owner of this property is... He said my name. For a moment, no one moved. Not my father, not my sister. The air felt frozen. Then my sister laughed, a short, sharp laugh. Okay, very funny. She looked at my father. Dad, tell him. But my father wasn't laughing. His eyes had locked onto me, slowly, carefully, like he was seeing something for the first time. ¿Por qué nadie me preguntó antes de tomar decisiones? The question floated in my mind as I stepped away from the wall. Mr. Alvarez watched the reaction quietly. My sister shook her head. This doesn't make any sense, she said. You don't own this house. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was something I had carried quietly for years. Not as a weapon, not as revenge, just as responsibility. My father's voice finally broke the silence. What is he talking about? His tone had changed. The authority was gone. Now there was only uncertainty. I walked toward the dining table slowly. Every step sounded louder than it should have. You remember when the bank called you 5 years ago? I said calmly. My father frowned. The refinance? I nodded. You couldn't qualify anymore. My sister looked between us, confused. What does that have to do with anything? I looked at her for the first time since the conversation started. Because the only way the bank approved the mortgage restructuring, I paused, was if the property was transferred. My father's face went pale. No. Yes. Mr. Alvarez quietly flipped a page on the clipboard. The transfer date matches exactly, he confirmed. My sister stared at me. You're lying. But her voice didn't sound confident anymore. My father rubbed his forehead. I remember signing papers, he muttered. Yes, I replied softly. You signed them over. The room felt smaller now, like the walls themselves were closing in around the truth. ¿Qué sucede cuando la persona que ignoraste tiene todo el poder? My sister stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Dad would never give you the house. My father looked at me again, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Memory, slow, uncomfortable memory. You said it was temporary, he whispered. I nodded. I did. My sister scoffed. So give it back. The words came out like a command, like she was still standing in the position of power she thought she had. But something had already shifted. Mr. Alvarez closed the clipboard. I'm afraid ownership transfers don't work that way, he said calmly. My sister's frustration exploded. You let me move in here. Her finger pointed directly at me. You watched me redecorate. You watched everything. I met her gaze quietly. Yes. Why didn't you say something? The question hung in the air like a storm finally breaking. I took a slow breath, because the answer wasn't simple. I wanted to see something, I said. My father's voice trembled slightly. See what? I looked around the room. The new paint, the new furniture, the boxes of my belongings still sitting in the garage. Then I looked back at them, how long it would take before someone asked me. Silence followed, a deep, uncomfortable silence. My sister looked away first. My father sat down slowly, like the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. Mr. Alvarez moved toward the door. If you decide to proceed with renovations, he said politely, the owner will need to approve the permits. The owner. The word echoed in the room. And for the first time since my sister had walked into this house with her boxes and her confidence, everyone understood exactly who that was.